Hey, what is going on, guys? In today's video, we're going to rank every single weapon in Royale Season 4. Now, something to keep in mind is that this is more meant to be a general guide of where the relative weapon strength lies. Of course, if you're on controller versus keyboard, this may vary a bit for you. If you particularly like or dislike a weapon, it may also vary. You can mix it up in your own personal ranking. But hopefully, if you're not sure what weapons to carry, this can serve as a general idea of, okay, this is the relative strength of weapons. Now, a few things to note is that you may be surprised just how low I rank a lot of the weapons, like the SCAR. You may be surprised at how low the SMGs are. But the truth is that most weapons, some exceptions exist like semi-auto, but most weapons are just generally a lot weaker. And something else to keep in mind is I'm going to try and balance this ranking for all inputs, but something to keep in mind is weapons like the hand cannon that used to work really well with L2, without L2, just are significantly weaker without it. And I might have overrated the hand cannon a little bit in previous, historical rankings because certain weapons synergize with L2. But because it doesn't exist, I'm not going to do that anymore. And with that, let's get started by going over the tiers. So X tier is these completely dominant weapons like the compact SMG on day one, drum gun on day one, that are just game breaking. You can just carry 4 of them and win the game. Right? I don't think any weapons exist there right now, but you don't want to see any weapons next tier. S tier I consider really strong weapons that need a nerf. There are a few weapons in there, unfortunately. They're not completely game-breaking, but they're pretty much a mandatory carry if you can find it. A tier are really solid weapons. Don't need a nerf by any means, but if you find that you're probably going to want to run it, it's a really solid option. B tier, those just decent choices, right? Like, nobody's going to have a problem with running decent choices into the end game. It's just not an exceptional weapon. C tier are just kind of those meh, they do the job type guns. They're not the worst thing in the world. They're not great. If you have it in the end game, okay, that's how it is. It's just fine. D tier are the weapons that I consider to be pretty bad. Not completely, laughably bad, but you don't want to be carrying these into the end game. And then F tier is the laughably bad weapons. Think like Hunter Fiend Crossbow. These things are completely useless, and honestly, you might be better off with a pickaxe. And with that, let's start out with the shotguns. So, pump shotgun we'll start out with first. Pump shotgun, I think, is a solid A tier option. While, yes, you can't one-pump people or double-pump, you have a much quicker draw speed, and you do more body damage. Definitely not as strong as it used to be in Season 4, but I still think it's a really solid choice, This is a great weapon for people that like to be aggressive, make edit plays. It's got a quick draw speed. You could do huge body damage, so all you got to do is just hit 2 clean body shots and you're done. Really solid weapon, and definitely a good choice. Heavy shotgun, I think, is very competitive. You have more range, more ammo, a little bit faster rate of fire, and more wall damage, but it comes at the cost of draw speed and base damage. Perfectly competitive. You could really pick either option. It's really solid. I prefer the heavy personally, but if you prefer the pump, no problem. They're basically even on strength. I would say the tac shotgun is a tier down. I think it's a little bit weaker. It's still a very decent choice, and you could even argue it's A tier if depending on your playstyle. If you're new to the game, this is probably the best shotgun to take. You don't need SMGs with it. It does good damage per second. You don't quite have that raw base damage, so making an edit play and then closing it's not quite as good for that, but it's still a really solid option and totally fine to take this one. Okay, now I know you're probably going to be a bit surprised that I put the SCAR and the standard AR so low, but if you compare it against Chapter 1, they have more bloom, slower reloads, and lower headshot damage. So I just don't quite think that they're A and B tier anymore. I just don't see them being there. They're just not as strong. Hitting those crazy beams are just a lot harder to do nowadays. Still, the SCAR is a decent choice. I'd still put it B tier. It's still probably the best AR option you got. And the standard AR is C. It's okay. It's a fine weapon. It'll do the job. Now, the burst rifle, for whatever reason, only has one model from gray to gold. So I'm just going to use the one model it has, which is the FAMAS. I think it's C. It's fine. It only has a 2 burst. I don't have a problem with the 2 burst necessarily. Certain things like peeking out and then hitting a triple headshot, you can't do that anymore. But you could argue it's a bit more consistent with the 2 burst. It's just okay. It does the job. The LMG, I think the LMG is worse than it was before. Yes, it's more accurate, and yes, it reloads faster, but you have less DPS because you've lost some rate of fire. You also have a way smaller magazine. I just don't quite think it's that great. It's just okay. That's really the case with a lot of ARs in this game nowadays. They're just okay. They do the job, I guess, but they're not exceptional. Thermal, I do think, has been buffed because its rate of fire has been more than doubled. It only costs about 20% of the damage. It is genuinely a really good long-range option. The problem is it's completely garbo at close range, so I don't think it can go higher than C, but it does the job. It's pretty competitive with the other lower tier ARs. Scope DR I actually think has managed to get worse. I almost want to put this thing in the joke tier, but I'm not quite going to do that. Reason why I say that is because, yes, the damage has been buffed quite a bit, like almost 50%. But you have damage fall off now. So at long range, you do the same damage anyway, and the rate of fire was halved. So it shoots so unbelievably slow, and it does the same damage on long range. This thing is just really bad. Highly recommend you don't use this thing. Okay, let's move on to the SMGs. So the drum gun, you can kind of argue is an AR, kind of an SMG. I think it's more an SMG in the way you play with it. I think it's C tier. It's just okay. Not the worst, not the best. DPS is a bit low, but that's kind of the case with every SMG. At least it has a bigger mag, so that kind of helps in being able to put some pressure on your opponents. It's just it's okay. You know, you can make it work. Silence SMG is very bad. You know, the rate of fire has been nerfed from 9 to 7.8. You have way more bloom now, less headshot. It's just not good. I highly advise you do not use this thing whenever possible. And then the tactical SMG, I also think the tactical SMG is very bad. You know, it's gone from 13 rounds a second to 9, gone from 35 rounds to 25 rounds in the mag. It's not good. Don't use this. It's also pretty bad. The purple one is a little bit better because it takes one less shot to eliminate someone. Maybe you could put the purple one in C tier, but this thing is just not good. So avoid it if you can. Now the pistol, I was almost thinking of putting C tier. It has been buffed a little bit, but the gray pistol still does 24 damage, and I think as long as the gray pistol does 24 damage, it's not going above D tier, because it still takes 5 shots to eliminate someone, which is not good. If it did 25, it'd only take 4. So, and I'm talking about early game, of course. Late game, it's 9 to 8, which matters less, because I don't think you're really carrying this thing to the late game. You know, it does the job, but it's just not very good. And the silence pistol, I'm honestly pushing the silence pistol down from C to D tier. Because you've lost 4 rounds in the magazine, that actually matters a lot, because now you're constantly out of ammo with this thing. I feel like it used to be in C tier where it was okay and situationally decent. Now I just think it's bad and it's situationally okay. Moving to the rest of the pistols, the hand cannon, I think the hand cannon is, C tier. I almost want to put it B, but without L2, you can't abuse that to hit some crazy shots. On keyboard, maybe it's B. I think it's honestly C. It's just an average gun. It's Maybe you could go B. I could see an argument. And the revolver, I think, is actually better than it was before. I think it's C tier now. Has less damage fall off and shoots a bit faster. So definitely a better option than it was before. Nothing exceptional, but it does the job and it works. And then finally, dual pistols. Dual pistols, I think, are actually genuinely pretty decent. I don't think it's enough to push it to B, but I think they're, because they've had headshot nerf, and, you know, I think they do like 1 less damage. But because they haven't been nerfed too significantly, I still think they're a decent option, and they totally work. So I think I'd put them in C tier. If you want an SMG-like weapon, you could run this. Okay, now let's move on to the snipers. So, starting with the bolt action. Bolt action doesn't have glare nowadays, but a little bit more damage helps out. I think it's still B tier. It's still a good choice. Nothing wrong with it. The problem is it's basically a direct upgrade that we'll talk about shortly. And the hunting rifle, I also think, is a decent choice, right? You know, no glare, does basically the same stats as it had before. A decent choice. But the problem is basically there's a direct upgrade, and that direct upgrade to both of those is a semi-auto sniper. Semi-auto sniper does over 100 base damage, which is absolutely ridiculous. You fire at 1.2 rounds a second, which basically means you have 10 tries, firing more than once a second, and you're able to consistently one-shot people, and you just need 2 body shots to eliminate someone. As someone who doesn't use snipers that much, this thing is crazy good. It's literally a direct upgrade from the bolt action. It's just absolutely ridiculous. It's almost X tier. I don't think it's quite there, but this is basically a mandatory carry if you can find it. Even if you don't like snipers, use it. It's just such a strong weapon. Okay, let's move on to the structure destroyers. Grenade launcher, I think, is S tier. Now that stuff explodes after 1 bounce, it's really, really good. It does less damage, but the amount of times you can leak shots in is just ridiculous. The old grenade launcher really worked well at its very specific range, at medium range, but this thing works well at close range. It's just really, really good, and I highly recommend you give it a go. RPG, well, I don't think it's quite as good, still a really solid option. I mean, you can still spam rockets pretty quick with its very good reload time relative to what it was in like late Chapter 1. I don't think that's enough to push it to S tier, but it's still a really good option and honestly a lot of fun to use. If you like comboing with a shotgun, this is probably a better choice than the grenade launch. You could go either way, but I think the grenade launch is overall better. And the minigun is a really good weapon as well. Easy A tier. You know, 252 DPS. It's really strong and it just works really well to put pressure. It's not quite as good in solos as it is in squads, but I don't think that stops it from being A because it really hasn't been nerfed all that much relative to late Chapter 1. And with that, I hope you found this video helpful, and I will catch you in the next one.